Entonces le invitamos a João Vendramini. Él va a hablar sobre el manejo de pasturas en climas tropicales y subtropicales. Él va a estar hablando en inglés. Es brasilero, pero está hace 14 años en la Universidad de Florida. Y él es PhD en el Departamento de Agronomía en Manejo de Forrajes. Es máster por la Universidad de San Paulo, Departamento de Ciencias Animales, Manejo de Forrajes. Bachelor en la Universidad de San Paulo, profesor en el Centro de Investigación y Educación Animal de la Universidad de Florida desde el 2012 hasta la actualidad. Entonces le damos la bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso. João.
Obrigado. Thank you. Thank you, José. I would like to thank the committee for inviting me to come today for the presentation. I have been in Paraguay a few times before, but I'll be positive to say that the highlight of my trip was to have the opportunity to learn and interact with SEA and learn about the group. So it has been really rewarding, and I'd like really to thank you for the opportunity. Before I start, I would like to apologize to the group because I'll give the presentation in English. I am originally from Brazil and spent most of I moved to the United States when I was 27. But I have done some presentations in some countries that are Spanish speaking, and I have a traumatic experience that one time I start my presentation in Portuguese thinking that the public would understand what I was saying, but probably a few seconds after I start, they ask me to switch to English. So that is a pretty heavy criticism on my Portuguese or my Portuñol. So to avoid that really embarrassing situation, so I just decided to go with English and make sure that translation will be properly done. So, and I don't need a translation for the question, so you can ask me in Spanish. I'll understand pretty well and be able to answer the questions for you. I would like to define first what will be a tropical and subtropical region. And it's pretty much the region between the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer and the tropical area. And the systems that I will talk today will be primarily the same one that we have in Paraguay, same one that we have in Brazil or Florida. That they are pretty much warm season perennial grasses. So warm season grasses that they are perennial, and there is very little opportunity to have some alternative forages during the winter, primarily because of the weather conditions. So we have those warm season pastures like we have brachiaris here, panicum, or like we saw yesterday, pangola. In Florida, we have much more bahia grass, paspalum, and we have cynodons, we have Bermudas, star grasses. So those are the systems that I will talk about the management today. So before I start my presentation, I'd like to ask you if you like that question, that picture, I mean. Do you like it? It's okay? Okay. How about now? Everybody like it now, right? It's exciting. Now people are wondering, what breed are those heifers, right? Why they have these black baldies, why they have the red cattle, what they are, and what they are crossed to. And my point here is the reality in the beef cattle business is nobody really likes forages. They like livestock, and I like livestock. I work with forages because it's the only cheap source of nutrients to beef cattle. That's why I like it. But in fact, people like livestock, and it's very difficult to make people start enjoying forages because it's not very exciting. When you build a house at your property and you have a porch and you look on the porch and you see cattle grazing, right? And then it's a really beautiful view. You have horses, you have cattle. Have you ever seen anybody that build a house with the porch and look at the grass and think that that's nice and just stay there staring at the grass? No, nobody does that. So that's why we have been, I think, we have a great advance in animal sciences and many times in enjoyment of livestock than we have in forage management. Because in fact, it's not something that we enjoy, it's just something that you need to do. Because if you decide to replace forage that grows with energy from the sun to go to the feed store and just buy feed, so then I think it will not be affordable anymore. And then it will not be fun to have livestock because you're going to start spending money and losing money. So that's why we need forages. And in order to live with forages, I think we have to manage them. And there will be some of the things that I'll talk about today, living with forages. And the main challenge is this very dynamic system. When you have a corn crop or soybean crop, you plant 120 days, you harvest, that's it. So you fertilize, you do the pest control, herbicide, and it's a sequence of things. When you have forages that we need to treat as a crop, but we have animals grazing, we have regrowth. It is perennial. It stays there through the whole season, through the rainy season to the dry season. So then that becomes the challenge. Fertility of the soil will change over time. We will go up, go down. We have a lot of nutrient cycling from grazing animals. So people that don't really work with forests, they don't have the appreciation for this dynamic system. And that requires a lot of management. One time in a grazing school, I told the producer that if you overgraze your pasture, you're going to kill it. And he told me that that was not right because he had moved from Canada to Florida and he has to mow his yard every week. And his grass doesn't die. The grass is still there and I cut it every week. Why you are telling me that if you graze it, you're going to kill it? It's because the animals are not mowers. They have a habit, they have their hoofs, they have the different habit of intake, and then you generate those problems, the variation in the different scenarios. And the other thing that is really important on the beef cattle is when you have a chicken production, and I'm not criticizing chicken producing here, when you have chicken production, you receive those animals, put in the chicken barn, 45 days you sell them. Then they get the animals, same feed, 45 days you sell them. When you have cattle, you have all these romantic things around it. That is much of the love for the cattle. So you have different forages. You like one species your neighbor doesn't like. You have a different breed. You have a different fence. You have a different mineral. And that's what is the exciting thing about cattle. Even people that never had cattle before, they get in the business, they love it. Because you have all these things. And we don't want to get rid of those. We wanted to keep those, but still manage that property so it will be profitable. But we need to understand that there is a lot of personal preference and feelings when we work with forages. And to the point that if you go to your neighbor and your neighbor is a successful beef cattle producer, you come back to your property and do the same thing, the outcome will be different. It will be different because you have a different employee, you have a different family member, and sometimes it rains on the other side, doesn't rain here, and your cattle will be managed different. So it's very important, the role of the administrator in this. We, as a scientist, we create these techniques that we put it there for producers to use, but we don't guarantee that that technique will be useful for you. So that takes the manager to get the technique and try. And as I said, it's very, very site-specific. And there is a dilemma in the beef cattle production, mainly here in the tropics, because there is a lot of push for intensification. People come to you and tell you that you need to intensify your beef cattle production. And I completely disagree with that. I disagree because intensification is not your goal. Intensification is the outcome of you applying techniques. So you can apply technique every single day to your beef cattle property and will not be intensified. And you will still be more profitable. And we know a lot of beef cattle systems. They are very extensive and highly profitable. When you intensify your system, you increase the investment, you increase the outcome, but also you increase the risk. But technification is different. You can apply techniques, and I will define what is a technique for us in my concept. A technique is a management practice that was developed by a researcher and was published in a very respectable journal, scientific journal. This is a technique. So you have a scientific thing that becomes a management practice. It was tested in a research setup and then become. And what is not a technique? Not a technique is, I particularly like Brahman cattle. And I will tell people, I really like Brahman cattle, I think you should have Brahman cattle. That is not proven that that Brahman cattle is more productive, right? This is my feeling, my perception. That is not a technique, right? That is not proven in a scientific peer-reviewed publication that that's better for you, right? In some conditions are, but that's just general. It's the same with supplements. It's the same with forage species. If it's not proven by scientific work published in the literature, for me, is not really a proven technique. So as I said, you get a technique and you incorporate in your production system, and then eventually will intensify your system. Or not. You can have just a more efficient system. What I'm saying is you can have the same number of animals and decrease your cost 20%, and you're going to be more efficient, more profitable, and you are no more intensive. Does it make sense? So I think this rush for the intensification, I think, is creating a lot of risk in the beef cattle scenario that sometimes we like also farming a beef cattle because it's somehow a low-risk application of our money. And we have the challenges in this, and now going specific about forage management. And one of the challenges of this forage management in these areas that I described is the seasonal production of forage. So forage doesn't grow, very rarely you're going to find a place that forage will grow year-long at the same pace. So with that in mind, you need to adjust your stocking rate or provide something for the animals to eat when forage is not growing. There is a very common scenario for beef cattle producers in the earth. And I have a very small sample of countries in beef cattle production, but I am from Brazil, and we had property in Brazil, and I moved to the United States, and I have lived in Australia. And the same thing that happens to all countries is, during this time of the year, beef cattle producers are really happy when the forage is growing. When we get to this time of the year, then they start praying more. And then we know that the drought will come, right? We know we have a dry season. We know that we have a winter. But we get there, we stop, and we don't have enough feed. Our pastures are short, and then we look in the horizon and say, oh my God, that is a very hard drought. That we knew about it, but we didn't get prepared. And that is very common, and I think I am a member of that club as well. We need to complain a little bit about the weather, and that is traditional in beef cattle production. But that is something that we really need to address in the forage management. I will talk to you today about most of this utilization here and touch few areas when we need to address right here. And the first thing that I'll talk about that is very simple is forage quantity. A lot of people, and when I go to the United States, many years ago, I used to be criticized because I work with warm season grasses that they have, according to them, low quality. Warm season grasses do not have low quality. What we have is forage there that is enough to maintain a lot of the animal categories that we run. It's not low, and I can prove it to you that we have forage that is really high quality. The problem is that it's not managed to the point that quality matters, because we don't have quantity. If you don't have any forage, what is the quality of that forage? There is no quality because you don't have quantity. And the main problem of beef cattle production is forage quantity. So after we have enough, then we start talking about quality. I will give you a number, for example. If I tell you that I need 3 hectares for 1 cow-calf pair, okay? 3 hectares for 1 cow-calf pair. Do you think that's good, bad, too intensive? No. We go from Australia, in the Western Australia, to 100 hectares to a pair. But we just visited some places yesterday that they have almost 1 pair to 1 hectare, right? But now, if I tell you that 3 hectares to a cow and show you this picture, what do you think? Is good or bad? It's horrible, right? Because this cow here will not be able to rebreed in 3 hectares. You need 15 if you have that amount of forage. But the other extreme is true as well. If I tell you 3 hectares for a cow right now, what's going to happen is you're going to lose your cow, right? Because it will be very difficult to find that cow in that Tanzania pasture right there. So we have that stocking rate mindset that is a very easy number to think about forage management because we know the area that we have and it's really easy to count animals, right? We know the number of animals and the area, we make the calculation. But in fact, the stocking rate is just a consequence of this, that is forage quantity. And quantity is important because we have a lot of research in the literature proving that 70% of the performance of the animals is based on intake, how much the animals eat. And we know in pasture, if you have herbage mass, quantity, you're going to improve intake, regardless of the nutritive value that will come later and we'll talk about. These are all scientific papers. It's a summary of papers showing that here, in these trials here, 90, here percentage 90, 31. When we increase the amount of mass, we increase the performance of the animals. Direct related. When we go to nutritive value, and we'll talk about quality, that is not as direct. You can change the nutritive value and still the performance of the animal will not change. Do you know why? Many times because there is no quantity. So quantity is the thing to focus on. And you have seen this graph here many times that is just classic from Dr. Mott from the University of Florida. And he created this model that it's somehow busy graph, but you can make it simple. That means if you have a pasture of 10 hectares and you have just 1 animal grazing, that means the animal will gain a lot of weight because it can select, it has a lot of forage. Now, if you have 5 animals in the same pasture, you're going to decrease the amount of forage, right? Because there is no opportunity for selection. The gain per animal will decrease. However, the gain per unit of area will increase because now you have 5 animals grazing. They will gain less, but they will have more animals. And there is this optimum range here that is what we are chasing, the optimum, right? Not the maximum, but the optimum. And then you have this scenario here that is becoming very, very popular in beef cattle production. That means undergrazing. That means you have much more forage than animals. You need that in scenarios where you have purebred animals, because otherwise the EPDs of your animals will not look good. So you need to maximize animal gain. And also, a lot of people are breeding heifers as yearlings at 14, 15 months. And those heifers need to gain weight in order to breed as yearlings. So you need to maximize the gain per animal. One thing that is really detrimental is if you run in this place here. Because when you have a shortage of forage and you are overgrazing, 2 things will happen. The first, the animals will lose weight. That's pretty simple and easy to see. The second one, you're going to lose the pasture. And planting a new pasture is probably the most costly thing that you can do in your beef cattle operation. So if you lose the desirable forage and have to replant, then you know you'll be in the red. You're going to be paying bills and receiving very little back. And this is just real data with brachiaria mulatto that I think is called here convert or in Brazil. is a hybrid brachiaria. So then we have three stocking rates, right? The very low and very high here. And look at the gain per animal what happened, and look at the gain per area. It's very similar to this thing, right? That happens in real life here. Heifers, beef heifers grazing brachiaria pasture. And this is a picture of the pasture that I just talked to you. So this is undergrazed. This was grazed at the right stocking rate, and this was overgrazed. And you can see here, that was detrimental for herbage mass and for animal performance. And we generate some data there that is also with mulatto brachiaria, but I think it can be applied to different forages. That is what we call herbage allowance, or if I don't know if it translates well, but it's oferta de forragem. So herbage allowance is pretty much the amount of forage that you have there in relation to the weight of the animal that is grazing that pasture. Okay? Just a quick example. If you have 1,000 kilos of dry matter, and if you have 1,000 kilos of animal grazing that pasture, your herbage allowance will be 1. 1,000 to 1,000, the ratio is 1. And we did this research, and we found out that when we have around 1.4, we didn't have increase in performance of the animals. So when you have 1.4 kilos of dry matter per kilo of animal exposed to that pasture, you have optimal intake here, and after that, it was just excess forage. But if you have less, the animals lost weight. So then you don't have sufficient quantity here. So the animals are losing weight. I like to talk about that number 1 to 1, but you can think 1.4 to 1, 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1, to the point that you're going to have enough forage for the animal to expose their performance. And we have also a lot of data showing that that is not really mathematic, because there are other things in the forage that also change the performance of the animals. Density, proportion of the leaves, they are all important. If you have forage this high, but it's all stems, your animals will still lose weight. So the composition of the canopy is really important. But if you manage correctly, you never will let you go to that extreme when the composition will be detrimental to the performance. And I believe in the last probably 10 years, there was a concept from temperate regions was brought to Brazil talking about the light interception. So they wanted to manage forage at the maximum or optimum light interception. And they believe that 95% of light interception is the best scenario. So that means 95% of the light that comes from the sun, that forage is picking up. And just 5% is hitting the ground, okay? That premise has the implication that the height of your forage is directly related to the light interception. So you manage the height, so you're going to have the light interception that you want. One problem with that, in theory, it looks good. But we have seen and published some work showing that the light interception in these tropical grasses not always is well related to the height. You may have a tall forage that will have still low light interception, and vice versa. Because as we know, when you have pastures, you have seen that, you have really dense forage after you fertilize with nitrogen during the growing season. When it gets to the dry season, the forage may be tall, but it's really thin, and it's not growing well. So the relationship between light interception and height is not the best. This number here, closest to 1, is the best. This is probably 66%. And I try to think that a good relationship is probably above 80, right? If I give somebody $1 and there is just 66% of chance that that person will give it back my $1, I will not give that $1 to that person, right? But if you think there will be 90% of chance, then it will be safer. So I think that is a poor relationship there and need to be more explored. And that trial was with Bermuda grass, but here we have all the grasses that we use here, and in Brazil, showing pretty much the same thing, or not a strong relationship between height and light interception. So that means we manage our pastures differently in different times of the year. So height is one parameter, but we need to consider other things. And I really like this publication here from Dr. Silva, but I don't really care for the height that the animals are going to the pasture, because this will be very conditional to the growing season, right? If you have a pasture that did not reach the height that you wanna, you don't have a choice. And that's what I tell my students. What are you gonna do? Open the gate and turn them loose on the road? And when the pasture reach the height, you bring them back, right? That is not an option. So the height that the animals start grazing, I don't really care much. But I'm really concerned about the height that you take the animals out. Primarily because this stubble height here will be enough to keep the persistence of the grass. So if you graze at this height here and don't abuse, you are sure that you're going to have a perennial grass for long, long years. If you start grazing short and really abusing, the grass will die. And then you're going to have a grass that you don't want. And that is a scenario that you are overstocking. This trial here, to show what I just mentioned, it was to the point that we have this herbage allowance. Remember the number that I showed to you, 1.4? So here, I have very low stocking rate that I have a lot of forage to those calves. Here, I have an intermediate that was a little lower and a high stocking rate with very low forage. Very low forage. Here, that's what happened to the gain per animal. So the animals start gaining very little weight, okay, when I decrease the forage quantity. And this is the picture of the animals in the low and high. That's clear, isn't it? How the difference made in the body condition of these animals and how much they were gaining. However, this I think is the most important data here, because jigs is the forage species that was in the pasture, the one that I planted and spent my money trying to manage, right? And common Bermuda is the invasive species that has very little production, and I don't want it. After I grazed those pastures for 2 years and I overstocked it, I lost. There was just 40% jigs left. I lost 60% of the plants on that pasture. And then the weeds took over. And then when you do that, you start getting the herbicide business, right? You start spending a lot of money doing weed control, but many times weed control may just be an aspirin to another problem. You will have your headache gone for a few minutes, and then you will come back because you are grazing too short and the pasture is dying. And I will mention just about, that is a very common management, that is people talk about do a continuous or rotational stalking. That means moving the animals around or not. There are different opinions and preferences, but there is no doubt that if you move the animals around, you respect the physiology of the plant, and you get a little more forage accumulation. So this quantity here is in pounds per acre, but you can translate really easy to kilos per hectare of dry matter. When you have the animals on the pasture continuously, there was 37 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. When we gave that pasture some break and we rotate the animals in different intensities here, we almost double the herbage accumulation. So giving that pasture a rest, there is no doubt that it's beneficial to your pasture. But one problem is the rotational grazing was sold to producers in a very complicated way that a lot of people gave up, because they believe that rotational grazing, you have to have a lot of electric fence, nitrogen fertilization, and then your life may become miserable, right? And then you may fail. And a lot of people fail and went back to the old system because the way that was introduced to them. And what I want to say is, this is 21 days rotation right here. So you have just 2 pastures. And you move the animals 21 days to a different pasture and move them back to another pasture. And can you see the benefit here? So this is a very easy thing to do, and it's still a rotational grazing. If you decide to do every day, that's fine. But it's a very easy concept that I think everybody needs to consider, because when you do continuous grazing, the cattle makes the decision for you. So the cattle, he'll graze, come back and graze the same place, and don't graze another place that will get stemmy and mature, and then you come and graze the same spot again. That spot that is overgrazed will become a weed patch. And then you have forage that didn't touch because the quality is not good. So then, if you don't do that, if you rotate, you make the decision. You make the cattle eat that whenever you want, and then when you don't want anymore, you move the cattle. That's why I think that is a good thing you have control of the grazing. And another really good benefit of rotational grazing is the distribution of the feces and urine in the pasture. This work we did in Florida, Dobe did it, I was co-author in that. So this is dung patches. This is where the animal did business there, okay? So you can see here in the continuous, look, it's all concentrated around here. And guess what it is right here? Water and shade. They keep coming to the water, hot climate in Florida, similar to here in the summer. They keep coming here, so 80% of all those rich nutrients that come from feces and urine was just deposited right here. In this scenario here, they spread pretty well. So that means you have to fertilize less your pastures, or you're going to have very little change in fertility here. But here you may have a drastic change, that this area here, you'll be pretty soon depleted from nutrients, and all the nutrients will be concentrated close to the water and the shade. The literature, however, doesn't really support that, because a lot of the trials that when we did a literature review show that the differences in animal performance and even gain per area is similar when you have rotational and continuous stocking. And the difference was primarily because most of those trials, they adjust the quantity. So if you have enough quantity in those scenarios, you not see a lot of difference. If you work on the edge of managing that forage, then you see the benefit. In general, 20% increase in herbage accumulation that may translate in 10% increase in stocking rate. Those are the rough numbers when you come from a continuous to a rotation. But the data in the literature on the research, it's very gray. It doesn't show those improvements very clear. And then I told you that I'll mention something about this winter, and that will be a completely separate talk, talking just about winter. But I'll just mention some few things that we do in the winter to supply the forage when we don't have growth. And it's worth to say where we are, I have about 3 freezing events every year. And there is a short period of drought. But you can translate that to some places around here with 3 months of drought, 4 months of drought, that will not have forage growing. So the stockpiled pasture is probably the most common way that we preserve forage in tropical areas, because it's cheap and it's easy to manage. You don't need machines, right? You just let your pasture to grow during the growing season, and then you use that quantity in the winter. We create some protocols in Florida, primarily to accommodate the necessity from the producers, where we stockpile those pastures for about 100 days. We fertilize with 70 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, and we let those pastures grow for 100 days. And then, in an average year, we can graze those pastures for about 3 months. 3 months of winter where we have our breeding season. So it's January, February, and March for us. So we graze for 3 months, and we can keep about 1 cow in half hectare during that winter month. That is the general protocol that we create and works really consistently throughout the years. I will show you some pictures of the pasture. This is a stockpiled pasture, early January, and this year we still didn't have a freeze event, so it's still really green. So the pasture bed is not growing much now because the days are short and you have cold weather. But we let it grow to this point here, and then we start using those pastures, January, February, and March. And look at what happened to the quantity, right? This is 1,000 kilos per hectare here. We start with these pastures with a massive amount of mass, but when we get to March, we are right on the edge here. So that is the sufficient amount of forage to keep that cow for 3 months in relatively good body condition. This is when we start. This is the second height that comes after a month. And then when it gets in the last month, you get pretty close to the bottom and it's pretty much stems. During those 2 months, we need to supplement with energy and protein so we will compensate for the decreasing quality of the pasture. But that is an easy protocol that we try to translate to producers so they will have forage in the period of shortage. I have seen some people here talking about hay. Hay is probably the most popular conserved forage in the United States, but primarily because, think about the whole country is in temperate regions. Most of the whole country is in temperate regions. That means in the winter they have snow this deep. So there is no forage to graze. Or you make hay and feed your animals, or they will not have forage. So when you don't have the option to have forage on the field, hay may be a good thing. The other thing that we use hay sometimes is for animals that have a higher nutrient requirement. So then you can manipulate the quality of your hay. But in extensive beef cattle production, hay is used primarily for heifers, animals with high nutrient requirement. And we just have a talk, privileged to mine, that really explained the use of silage. And silage is another option that is quite recent in beef cattle production in Florida, primarily because the machine now is really good, and we can make round bales the same way that we bale hay and just wrap with plastic and make silage. The problem is our grasses are not really suitable to make silage because it has low dry matter concentration, a low concentration of sugars and starch, so fermentation is always not good. So you can have quantity in that scenario, but sometimes it may become a wreck because you spend your money doing that and the quality is so bad that your animals will still lose weight when receiving that material. And now I will switch to valor nutritivo and qualidade, forage quality primarily. And in academia, we have this difference in these two words. Nutritive value is something that you measure in the lab. It's something that you get back from your forage when you send to the lab. That is protein, TDN, NDF, ADF. That is nutritive value. Quality is different. Quality is your animal performance. It's a combination of how much the animal ate from the forage plus the nutritive value of the forage. I'll give you an example of a forage that will have high nutritive value and low quality. I don't know if you are familiar with lucina. It's a legume, a tree legume. Sometimes what happens, if you don't shape and don't trim the tree, it gets really high. So the forage has great nutritive value, but the animals are not able to eat because they cannot reach the leaves. The nutritive value is high, the quality is low because the animals cannot eat it. Another example is with festuca, tall fescue in the northern states and annual ryegrass. When you test those in the lab, they have exactly the same nutritive value. Digestibility is about 75%. It's really digestible. But the tall fescue has an endophyte that when the animal eats, make them a little sick, so then they lose weight or they don't gain weight. So it's the same nutritive value. If you get the sample from the lab, it will be the same. But one has high quality, the other one does not have high quality. So that's the difference between those two terms here. And when we send a forage to test, 99% of the people will tell me, and I run the forage testing lab in Florida for producers. We have a lab at the research center at ONA that we receive samples from the producers. So everybody get the test and tell my forage is very good, the protein is 15%. That is the only thing that most of the people tend to look at, is protein. They say, oh, it's high protein is good. However, we know that protein is something really easy to fix because we can supplement with small amounts and correct the problem. So protein is a really small part of the puzzle because what is important is energy. Energy is the nutrient that will spend most of your money, and sometimes in tropical forages, if you have really low energy or high amounts of fiber that is not digested, your animal will not eat. So you decrease the intake, and then you have the animals losing weight, even if you have protein. If the digestibility is 35, 36%, like most samples that we get from some forages, so then you don't have performance. So what I'm saying is, I think is a very important thing when you test forage to focus on energy. And also take a look at the protein, but the protein, as I said, is very easy to fix when the energy is more complicated and you spend most of your money in energy. And just a little history about testing forage. There was an old system that was created when we just test fiber, crude fiber. And then later, in 1960s in Cornell in New York, so there was a researcher that found out that the crude fiber doesn't really tell us anything in animal performance. It was a poor relationship. If you gave me the crude fiber, that doesn't tell you anything about if the forage is good or bad. So then he created this system that's called ADF-NDF, acid detergent fiber, neutral detergent fiber. Two different things that he tested that further, they have those two numbers, and he did that because he found out that NDF, neutral detergent fiber, is highly correlated to forage intake. Okay? NDF then is correlated with intake. If there is high NDF, the animals will eat less forage. And ADF was correlated with digestibility. It's an easy thing to do to tell how digestible your forage is. That was his proposed methodology. However, nobody told us that that trial was done with dairy cows consuming corn silage with a high concentrate diet. So think about it. You have a dairy cow in confinement eating probably 30%, 40% of the diet as corn silage, and the rest of the diet is pretty much concentrate. And now we translate that to the beef cattle that we have in tropical and in subtropical regions. How close is that? I don't think anybody here will have a cow in confinement eating corn silage and 60% of the diet as a concentrate. So, and that means later, some other researchers found out, like Dr. Moore in Florida, with tropical grasses, he found out that the relationship between ADF and digestibility is 0.4. Very low. So there is very low relationship. So if you test ADF in your forage and try to make up what is the energy, you have 40% of chance to be doing something right, and 60% of chance to have a wrong number. And the same thing happened with the NDF. Let me go back here. So this is just the graph showing that in this forage here that is tempered, this is annual ryegrass and clovers, the relationship was pretty good. But when you put those forages here that are all C4, it was very dispersed. So not a good relationship. And what I did, I went to Florida and got samples of brachiaria, the mulatto, that is a very good nutritive value warm season grass. And some stargrass, that is the forage that I have seen around here. It's quite popular here in Brazil and Costa Rica. I tested the ADF, right? And I tested the real digestibility of the forage. So that means I fed 2 animals. The animals ate the forage, and then I calculate the digestibility right here. This one, the real digestibility is 64, and this one is 51. I got those samples and sent to 12 labs in the United States. 12 different labs. And this is the numbers that I got. Look at the variation that you can have. You can have something here that will be meeting the requirement of your replacement heifers with no supplement. But then the lab will tell you that will barely meet the requirement of a mature cow. And you're going to spend money in supplement. So you don't need, because that is the digestibility of the forage. So the system that we use, ADF and NDF, is really not really applicable to the warm season forage that we use. So then we start trying to measure the digestibility of the forage different ways. And we found that if you have an in situ or in vitro system that is well calibrated, you can get closer to the true number. It's very laborious, has a lot of details, but may be a very efficient way to try to tell you what is the energy of your forage. But again, it needs the calibration of the lab. You have a lot of different ways. It's not a certified method. Every lab can have a different method. So then there are some problems there. But there is no doubt that the in vitro or in situ digestibility will be probably the most accurate way to determine that energy in the forage. So here you see some problems, and for my friends that are nutritionists, so they hear me to talk about TDN, total digestible energy. They think that is a backward term, because now most of when you work with feed balancing, you start working on the energy system balance. So they have net energy for ME, metabolic energy, net energy for gain, so on and so forth. But the main problem is all these numbers here, in most of the samples that we receive from commercial labs, they are calculated from TDN. That is wrongly calculated from ADF. So it doesn't matter if you report net energy or metabolic energy, because the error starts back here and just went through the system. So I still think that TDN is a very practical way because it's more well understood. So you know the energy of your forage by knowing the TDN. We know there are limitations. Forage has less TDN than concentrate. If you have 1 kilo of forage with 60% TDN, and you have 1 kilo of concentrate with 60% TDN, that is not the same thing. The concentrate will have more energy, because concentrate generates less methane production, and forage generates more methane production, so you lose energy in that process. But nonetheless, TDN is still very reliable way if you calculate that TDN correctly. Some people talk about the NIRS. I don't know if you know about the NIRS. It's a machine that came to solve our problems. You just put the green forage there and tell you all the numbers. It seems too good to be true, right? So everybody that has been working for 100 years on this have never figured that out. And it is a good method as long as you do a very good calibration. So the results are as good as your calibration. If you calibrate with the wrong results, you're going to have a wrong result. This is a mathematic formula that will calibrate and generate the numbers for you. So, and this is a lot of time consuming as well, because you need to keep calibrating the machine, so you can still have this method and have very bad numbers. And I think the goal is to have the number as close as possible from reality. And the method will not give you that number. I think the procedure will. I showed you that before. So then there is the NDF, as I mentioned, related to intake. The same story. People think that if you have 1.2% of the body weight consumption of NDF, you can translate that in the intake of the animal. That is not correct, because again, the R square is 30% reliable, the equation. So NDF is not a good indicator of intake as well. And there are different ways now to try to come up with this energy value. As I said, the in vitro procedure is still, in my opinion, the most reliable if it's well calibrated. But you're going to find in the literature several equations. So I think if you work with your nutritionist or somebody that do the work, they will be able to help you to adjust those equations and get a close number. NDF digestibility was the next big thing 5 years ago, using the dairy business. Again, it's a good number as long as you have a good calibration. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. If you get a forage testing results that has 30 different results, I promise to you that if you have a cow-calf system, you're going to use 2 for supplementation. So then, the other results is pretty much calculated from equations, and most times you may not need them. And in pastures, we know that if you have a forage with better nutritive value, you have potential to have greater gain. This is animal gain. If the forage has higher nutritive value, the animal will eat less and get more gain. And the opposite is true. If the forage has very low nutritive value, sometimes the animal will have to eat more to try to meet the requirements, but even though we'll have a ceiling, that will generate no increase in gain. So this work here was done with Bermuda grass, but it's true for most of warm season grass. So you know, if you have a low quality forage, you have a limit there that you're going to gain. For cow-calf systems, it's very likely that you're going to meet the requirements of that cow, but if you are working with growing animals, stockers, or finishing animals, this is really important. If you work with a low nutritive value forage, you never reach the goal, or you have to add a lot on the supplement side. And as I mentioned before, those factors are all combined. So this is not mathematical. You have nutritive value, quantity, and the composition of the canopy of your forage. And then, based on your experience, I think you make your own adjustments, because the relationship between the soil, plant, and animal is quite variable. So there is no number, really, that will tell you the whole truth. But all those are really, really associated. And one interesting thing, when I moved to Florida, was we have these high-quality heifers that, in my opinion, coming from Brazil, when I was exposed to the American system, I thought that they were really high quality. On the crossbreed standpoint, a lot of heterosis, and really animals that were weaned with high birth weights, showing that they had potential. So then we wean those animals really early in the summer, and we start feeding those animals, and they don't gain any weight. It was very frustrating, because a heifer that is eating 1%, 1.5% of the body weight as supplement with the best pasture that we can grow was gaining 200 grams a day, maximum 400 grams, when in different systems in Australia and here, the same animal would be gaining 1 kilo a day. And that all happened because of the environment. The humidity, water standing, mosquitoes make these growing animals to suffer a lot during the summer in Florida, and that really limited the gain. So now I'm talking to you that I have quantity, I have quality, and I have no performance, primarily because environmental conditions. So then producers adapted themselves to that condition and try to optimize the way that they grow heifers. Many of them, they load the heifers in the truck and send to Georgia in the summer. And that is a very economic way. You pay for transportation, take those heifers to a place that has better environment, and those heifers will gain a lot. So how the environment is important. So you not get the same gain in Paraguay that you're going to get probably on the other side of the river in different regions. It will be very different. And I will jump to my conclusions here. The role of the administrators and most of you that work with beef cattle is really to try to collect all this information, right, that research generate and try to test in your property. I don't tell people to try everything that they hear about it, but some things that come back consistently with positive results is always good to try a small set of animals or in a little pasture and try, and that is the way that you're going to technify your system, and eventually you're going to intensify. But if you never try it, if you do the same thing that you did yesterday, today, tomorrow will be the same outcome. It will not change. But you can try little things that will not put you in a difficult situation economically and in the production standpoint, and try to see if that works for you. And try to remember, weather is the most important thing in our life, right? You may try 1 year, it doesn't work. It doesn't mean that you need to give up and never try again. You may try it again, because next year, I promise to you, the weather will be different, right? So this year, for us in Florida, was a really interesting year, because we got hit by hurricanes. And then all the forage production, all the animal data really go out of the chart, because it's a very unusual. We got 500 millimeters of rain in 24 hours in a place that is poorly drained. So then that's the effect the environment can have in your beef cattle production. A quantidade de forrage, like I said, herbage quantity is the first thing that you need to manage. If your pastures are lower than the stubble height that I told you during the growing season, you need to be concerned. You need to change your management. Many people that call me and I come to the property, it's a very simple fix. They are really frustrated with my opinion, but I give to them anyway. And I tell them, when I get there, they tell me why I'm losing my pasture and why this is not working. Should I fertilize more? Should I build fences to rotate? I tell no. The only thing that you do, you sell 20% of your herd. Right now, everything will be better. You're going to increase pregnancy rates, you're going to increase the profitability of your property, and you'll not have to replant pastures every year. That's an easy fix. And most of the problems are because we have too many animals, we overgraze and kill the grass. The herbage quantity and nutritive value are really related. So it's very good for us if you rely on supplementation to try to get the best way to estimate the digestibility of your forage. Because there will be a way that you can manage the supplement and save money. If you are like in Florida and like in Brazil, supplementation is probably the most costly thing that we can do in our beef cattle operation, if you want to keep those animals well. So that's the area that we need to focus. That's the area that you need to really pay attention and see if you can get better, because a little saving there can save you a lot of money. So that's the area. And before I finish here, I would like to show you, if you are interested, we have a podcast at the University of Florida where I interview producers like you. I do that because many times these producers have much more knowledge and information than I do, right? So now I am recording every month, I interview a different person that will give me information in several different areas in beef cattle production. Such this one, Jim Strickland, he was a member of the committee that have conservation easements, or the state pay you your land so you not develop the land, you not build houses in your land. So they buy your land and you keep using your land for perpetuity, right? And then the land will never be developed, just to keep the water resources, wildlife, and so on and so forth. So he gave us information about that. We have podcasts in animal breeding, nutrition, wildlife. So if you are interested, you can go to the website and check out and listen to the podcasts. And I'd like to thank you much for your attention. I am 2 minutes short of my time, so I think I got pretty close. And I'll turn it back to José. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, João. Vamos a continuar con las preguntas. Entonces, le llamamos al doctor Hugo Frutos para moderar y al director Eric Rieder, si puede subir al escenario.